Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today I'm going to be doing a Burning Abyss deck profile. So I'm really excited for you guys because this deck is an absolutely crazy rogue contending deck that has stood the test of time over and over again, still being an amazing deck even though it was released all the way back in Duelist Alliance, which is actually my favorite era of Yu-Gi-Oh! So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards like in your name in the description of every single video, getting a signed card to the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month to your patron along with test hands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're playing 3 copies of Skarm Malebranche of the Burning Abyss. So this card is a really good card for the deck because it has an ability that if you control a monster that's not a Burning Abyss, you destroy this card. And you can only use one of the following effects of your Skarm per turn. Now, all of your Burning Abyss share that ability that if you control a monster that's not a Burning Abyss, they will destroy themselves, and they can also let you special summon them from the hand if you control no spell or trap cards, but you can only get either or the effects, either special summoning them or their unique effects, which is really helpful for the deck because they can easily swarm the field. So Skarm's unique effect is that during the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can add 1 level 3 Dark Fiend type monster from your deck to your hand, which is a really helpful effect, and it's actually developed an entire saying in the Yu-Gi-Oh community saying Skarm end phase, because you get to search a card, and there's a lot of cards that have actually taken after this card in the game, which is really cool. We then play 3 copies of Seer Malebranche of the Burning Abyss, one of the best cards in the entire deck. Seer's unique effect is if this card is sent to the graveyard, then you get to target a Burning Abyss monster in your graveyard and special summon it back to your field. This effect comes up all the time in this deck, and I'm so glad this card is still at 3. For the longest time, we only had 1 copy of Seer, and then it finally went to 2 and finally 3, which has really helped out the deck a lot with being able to play 3 copies of Seer all over again. The same is the case with Graph, which you also play as a 3 of in this deck. Graph is a super helpful card for what this deck does, and a key combo piece, because if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon a Burning Abyss monster from the deck, which is really nice to be able to get the exact one you need onto your side of the field when you need it. We then play 2 copies of Farfa. Shoutouts to Farfa. Farfa is a really neat card because if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target a monster on the field and banish it till the end phase, which helps out the deck to deal with problematic monsters and help you OTK. We then play 2 copies of Libic. Libic lets you special summon a monster that's a level 3 Dark Fiend monster from your hand when it's sent to the graveyard, but you negate its effects, which does come up a lot because it will actually negate the destruction effect of your Burning Abyss monsters, which helps out the deck because they're not constantly destroying themselves. We then play a single copy of Alec, which is a neat card because if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target a phase-up monster on the field, negate its effects until the end of the turn, which helps out with your copies of your Beatrice. We then play a single copy of Barbar just so we can do a little bit of burn damage, because if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can banish any number between 1 and 3 Burning Abyss monsters and inflict 300 points of damage for each one you banish for a maximum of 900 damage, which is pretty good to be able to go in for during time. We then play 3 copies of Tour Guide. You got to play the solid gold Tour Guides for this deck. Pretty much the entire deck is gold rares, which is kind of neat, but when this card is normal summon, you can special summon a level 3 Fiend monster from your hand or deck. So this is the single best normal summon in the entire deck. And you might be wondering, wait a minute, they actually destroy themselves when you summon them to the field with another monster, and Tour Guide's not a Burning Abyss. Well, Tour Guide actually negates the effect of them being destroyed, which is kind of nice. But it also negates all of their field effects, which is something to keep in mind. We then play 3 copies of Fiendish Rhino Warrior. Fiendish Rhino Warrior is one of the cards that's in this deck that should have been a Burning Abyss monster, but it's not by name, but it is by effects. Fiend monsters you control, except for Fiendish Rhino Warrior, cannot be destroyed by card effects, basically protecting all the Burning Abyss monsters from being destroyed by their own effects. It also has a Foolish Burial effect that if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can send any Fiend monster that you want from your deck to the graveyard, which helps the deck out a lot because it activates literally any of your Burning Abyss monsters' effects. We then play 2 copies of Absolute King Backjack. Backjack is a neat tech card in this particular build because I'm actually playing the trap variant of this deck. And what this card does is during your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can banish this card from the grave to excavate the top card of your deck. And if it's a normal trap, you can set it to your field. Otherwise, send it to the graveyard. And that set card can be activated during the turn you set it. And then it has the ability that if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and then place them on top in any order, which helps you out a lot because you get to stack your deck and be able to know what you're going to hit when you want to hit it, which helps out a lot for your Dante mills. So that's it for the monsters, guys. We're not playing any hand traps because we are playing a trap build, which is a very neat variant of this deck and actually cuts down a lot on the cost of this deck, making it relatively budget. And we don't play any spells either, so let's get into the traps. So for the traps, we're playing a single copy of Imperial Order because why not play this card as a one-of in here when we're not playing any spells of our own? This card is just going to benefit us by stopping our opponent from activating any spells. We play 3 copies of Trap Trick. Trap Trick is such a good card in this deck because this card basically turns our 3 of trap cards into 6 of trap cards, which is really nice because it lets us search any trap that we want, set it to our field, and banish a trap with the exact same name as it from the deck, which helps out a lot in this deck, but you can only activate 1 trap card for the rest of the turn. We then play 2 copies of Compulse. Compulse bounces cards that we don't want to have to deal with that our opponent's going to play. We play 3 copies of Fiend Griefing. Fiend Griefing is always a card that I've really liked in BA because it lets you target a monster in your opponent's graveyard and shuffle it into the deck, and then you get to send a Fiend monster from our deck to the graveyard, essentially being a Foolish Burial and almost a DD Crowish effect by getting the cards out of your opponent's graveyard. We then play 3 copies of the Paleozoic Dynamiscus. Dynamiscus is kind of like Karma Cut for this deck, that you target a face-up card on the field, discard a card, and then you can banish that card, which helps out a lot just to deal with your opponent's problematic cards. The only unfortunate thing about this card is it does target, but it's still really good because if your opponent chains to this, the discard effect isn't the first thing, so you actually won't discard until it resolves, which is kind of neat. We then play 3 copies of Ice Dragon's Prison. Ice Dragon's Prison is a card that outs literally any card in the game. If your opponent plays a copy of Phoenix Enforcer against you, you can out it with this card. If your opponent plays a copy of Dragoons against you, you can out it with this card because what it does is it targets a monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summons it to your field, and then its effects are negated. Then you can banish a monster from both players' fields that had the same type. You have to use Warriors to summon out your copy of your Phoenix Enforcer, and you have to use a Spellcaster to summon out Dragoon, so this card can really deal with a lot of problematic monsters that are boss monsters that you just don't have other ways to out. We then play 3 copies of Torrential Tribute because you really need a way to board wipe the field, and this card helps out a lot to be able to basically board wipe the entire field when a monster is summoned from all the monsters. So I play this card as a 3 of, and it's just so good in this deck. We then play 3 copies of Solemn Strike because I want to be able to deal with monster effects in some way outside of the extra deck, and this card comes in handy because when a monster would be special summoned or a monster effect is activated, you pay 1500 life points to negate the activation or the summon and destroy that card, which is pretty good to be able to just stop the exact card that you want to stop. So that's it for the traps. Let's get into the extra deck. I still think it's really cool that you basically don't have to play spells in Burning Abyss. You can basically just play traps and monsters. We then play for the extra deck. We're going to be playing 3 copies of Dante. Dante is such a good card. I love this card in a lot of decks, and it's one of the most interesting boss monsters in the game. It has a really cool effect that once per turn you can detach a material from this card and choose a number between 1 and 3, mill 1 to 3 cards off the top of your deck, and then it also has the ability that after you mill those cards, it gains 500 attack for each card sent to the graveyard, going out to 2500. Also, if it battles, then you can change it to defense position if it attacks at the end of the battle phase. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target a Burning Abyss card in your grave, accept this card, and add it back to your hand, which is pretty good to help you roll through your BA monsters. We play a single copy of Beatrice because she's basically a walking Foolish Burial and is super helpful, and you can actually make her on top of Dante, which is really helpful for this deck. 1 copy of Loflin, the Sea Dragon, because it gets back your banish cards that you need, especially if you banish them off of Barbar, and it helps you also with cards like your Helps you out with cards like going into your copy of your Utopic Future, because this is a rank 3 card. You can go into that really easily. I have considered dropping this for a Break Sword, but that is an option for you guys if you want to go that route. I then play a single copy of F-Zero because F-Zero is insanely good, especially to go into our copy of F-Zero Utopic Draco Future, which is a really good boss monster for this deck. It helps out the deck a lot because it just gives us a monster that basically has the ability that it's not going to be, it can't be destroyed by battle or by card effects, and then once per turn when an opponent activates a monster effect, you can quick effect detach a material, negate the activation, and if you do and that monster's on the field, you take control of it. So it's an easy way to actually take a Dragoons away from your opponent. It's an easy way to take away cards that are going to be really impactful that your opponent is going to be using, and it's just an overall fantastic boss monster. We then play a single copy of Downward Magician so we can actually overlay this on top of our Dantes or our Levenair, and then we play a single copy of Zeus because Zeus can totally board wipe like your Torrentials, but it doesn't destroy, it actually sends, which is pretty helpful for this deck. Play a single copy of Dante Pilgrim. Dante Pilgrim is easily made off the copy of Beatrice because Beatrice lets you special summon this card really easily. And it has a really neat effect that once per turn during either player's turn, you can send a BA monster from your hand to the graveyard to draw a card, and if this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, or if this card you control is sent to the graveyard by an opponent's card effect, you can send a card that your opponent's hand to the graveyard, which is pretty good. And it also has the ability that your opponent cannot target this card with card effects, which is pretty good on a 2800 body. We then play a single copy of Boral Sword just to board wipe and be able to go in for game with this card because it's the OTK piece. I don't feel like you need access code in this deck all that much, so I just play the Boral Sword to go in for game. We play a single copy of the Topologic Trisbana. Trisbana is really good in this deck if you're playing against a back row heavy deck like Altergeist or something like that. This card comes in really handy because if you summon a monster to a zone this card points to, it board wipes all of the back row. So you can actually chain something like a Fiend Griefing with this card and then send a copy of Graph to the graveyard, or Seer, special summon one of them to your side of the field with the effect of Graph or Seer into a zone this card points to, and then board wipe your opponent's entire back row. And if you know you're playing against that, it's really easy to go into this card. We play a single copy of Unicorn to spin stuff, Phoenix to pop spells and traps, and then one of the best cards in the entire extra deck, Cherubini. Cherubini is really good because she lets you actually send cards from the deck to the graveyard, and monsters this card point to cannot be destroyed by card effects, and if this card would be destroyed by battle or by an opponent's card effect, you can send one other card you control to the graveyard instead. And you can also send any level 3 you want from your deck to the graveyard, and then target a Burning Abyss you control in the field, and it gains attack equal to the attack of that monster. And this card can actually get quite big, or the effects of it can actually boost monsters quite big with Barbar, because Barbar is sitting at 1700. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you enjoyed. It's a really fun deck to play with. It's relatively budget as well. The extra deck is a little bit pricey with the Utopic Future. I think Utopic Future is sitting at like 30, and then the AA Zeus is like 10 to 20 right now. But other than that, the main deck is relatively cheap, and I tried to keep it that way for you guys if you're looking for a rogue deck. This is a really fun deck to carry around because not everybody's going to be expecting Trap BA, and it's a really fun deck to play because a lot of people just don't expect it. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell on there so you can become part of the notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.